Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features Nickolas Butler at Hennepin County Library, Excelsior. Nickolas Butler is the internationally best-selling author of critically acclaimed novels like The Hearts of Men in 2017 and Little Faith in 2019. His breakout debut, Shotgun Lovesongs in 2014, remains among his most enduring works to date. It centers around 5 lifelong friends who have taken wildly diverging paths in life, but remain indelibly linked both to one another and to the small Wisconsin community they called home. Butler's 2 most recent novels build on the author's literary fiction bona fides, with elements of suspense and romance respectively. Godspeed, released in 2021, follows 3 struggling construction partners who agreed to build a lavish mansion for a mysterious client on an impossible deadline. The Financial Times calls it an effective blend of rural fable and snow-lashed Rocky Mountain noir. The setup is pure Hitchcock. Butler's latest, A 40-Year Kiss, is a poignant story of second chances and rekindled love. In a glowing review, Library Journal opines, "This is a love story not only between Charlie and Vivian, but also between the novel and the Midwest."
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. In the words of Tom Waits, it would have been a real drag if nobody had showed up, so I appreciate seeing your smiling faces. I think I'm going to introduce a little bit about where this book came about, and then I'll read you a chapter, and then I understand that maybe some of you have read the book as a book club, so I'm here to answer whatever questions you may have. I have nowhere else to be tonight, so ask away, right? So just about 3 years ago, not quite to the day, but on September 22nd, 2022, I was seated at the bar of the Tomahawk Room, which is a bar in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. It's a bar that I consider to be one of my very favorite bars anywhere in Wisconsin. I was seated towards the front of the bar. I was working a Sudoku puzzle. I was minding my own business. I was there to drink a responsible amount of alcohol, but not too much. And there were 2 people I'm guessing about their mid-60s, who were seated just around the corner of the bar from me, and I had paid them no attention whatsoever until I heard the man say to the woman, and you'll forgive me if I read this off my phone, but I began taking notes at some point in their conversation, so it is on my phone. I began paying attention to them when I heard the man say, "I still dream about you. I dream about the mornings when we were laying in bed. I dream about kissing you. Can I kiss you?" At that time, I began blushing profusely. I took my phone out and began to start taking notes because I felt like something quite magical was going to happen, and I didn't really know what that was. When they kissed, it was very passionate and very long, and my blushing just kept intensifying. Eventually, they disengaged from one another, and the man said, "Oh, I miss kissing you. Remember how much fun we had together? I do, the little trips we took. God, I love you." And then the woman turned to him and said, "You used to always have chocolate for me." And at this point I thought, if this dude pulls a chocolate out of his pocket, my brain's gonna explode. But he did not. And their romantic conversation went back and forth for about another 10 or 15 minutes. And then they left the bar. And the last book that I wrote was called Godspeed. It's for sale out here. It's a very dark literary thriller about late-stage capitalism, the decline of the American dream, meth addiction. It's a dark, dark book. And yet here I'm sitting at the bar and I'm just digesting what I heard, and I thought, you know what, it feels like the cosmos want me to write a novel about what I just heard. And so in my mind I thought, well, I guess it's going to be kind of like a literary romance, and I'd never really written anything like that before. And I knew that my publisher probably wasn't going to be super excited about that, because how are you supposed to, on the one hand, publish a literary thriller and then go into like, publishers hate that stuff. But I think it's really bad form cosmically to receive a moment like that and not do something with it. So I just thought, well, whatever, we're going to just write this book. So the chapter that I'm going to read to you basically takes up the minute after those two people left the bar. They zippered their jackets and walked out into the night. It was cold, but not too cold, and the wet evening air felt good in their lungs. He reached again for her fingers, and she reached for his. They squeezed hands and held on, and if that was all the night was, he might have been thrilled. It had already been so much more than he could have ever expected, ever dreamed. If this was his last night on earth, it had been a miracle, and he could lie down in his bed and close his eyes and know a final, complete happiness, a warmth and solace that could carry and guide him anywhere. She had already done that for him. But now here they were out on a walk, strolling along Bridge Street down a slight incline towards the Chippewa River. He did not feel like a man over 60 years old. He did not feel any age. All he felt was love, promise. He tried to tamp down his emotions, but it was almost impossible. They passed over West River Street to a new park built right along the river. This part of the city had changed so much from his memories of it that there was a real moment of confusion, of cognitive dissonance. There was the river and the dam was all lit up. Strobing lights of red and yellow, and the electric company's logo above it all, NSP, also in yellow. These lights were doubled on the water where they blurred and rippled nicely. There were fishermen at the foot of the dam talking and smoking marijuana, but he could not quite hear what they were saying. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I should probably head home soon. Melissa will wonder." "Melissa's your daughter?" he asked. There was so much to learn about her. Her path had branched off again and again, leading to other generations, whereas he realized sadly he had created nothing. No one would mourn him when he was gone. He felt some nervousness just then about meeting Melissa and her children. He worried that even if he'd comported himself well tonight, there were still opportunities ahead to ruin everything, to ruin the perfection of this evening. "Yeah, she's a good kid, just a little lost maybe." "Well, we've all been there before. Like I said, I never had any kids myself, but that's the advice I used to give the younger guys on the railroad. Be patient. Success looks different for different people. Folks find themselves at different times. It's not always so easy to know your purpose, to know what'll make you happy, even if it's right in front of you." "That's true," she said quietly. Should we maybe turn back?" "No," he said, "let's walk a little more. Just downriver, a little more, a block or two." "Okay," she said, "a little longer then." They didn't say a word, but their shoulders were so close they were like two trees growing together. He didn't dare utter a thing, so afraid was he of ruining all this. Finally, they stood in front of an old bar, the Sheely House Saloon. There were 3 men inside drinking, staring up into the blue of a television mounted above them. "Want to go in?" he asked. "We could have one more for old time's sake, a nightcap." "This place is supposed to be haunted," she said, turning to smile at him. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I don't know," he said. Then he said, "Yes, I guess I do." "Really?" she said. "Why?" He looked up at the night sky. There were a few handfuls of stars, the brightest ones anyway, burning against the lights of the sleepy town, but he couldn't find the moon. "I guess," he said unsteadily, "that I want to believe in spirits and souls. I wouldn't have said something like that back when I was younger, when we were married, I suppose, but you start to get older, she put in. Yeah, he said, you start to lose people. First your grandparents, and then your parents, then it's your favorite musicians and actors, athletes and writers, then it's your friends, and you want to see those people again. At least I do. I miss those people. I hope heaven is a long party where I never get drunk. Someone just keeps passing me flutes of cold champagne, and I go from one room to the next, seeing old friends, old relatives, but no one ever has to stop to clean the dishes. They just disappear. A waiter brings you a new, fresh, cool glass. It would be like a reunion, one of those evening parties where time doesn't matter, where it's dark as you walk into the party and dark when you walk out. I think that must be the trick of heaven. When he was finished talking, he immediately worried that he'd gone on too long, said too much. He'd shared with her that his image of heaven was endless drinking, and now he wanted those words back, even if it was his truth. He glanced at her face, but if she was bothered by what he had said, she betrayed nothing, only the discomfort of the cold and drizzle. The trick? She asked. Yeah, the trick. There must be no time in heaven. No sense of time. Everything would have to feel like one scene, one beautiful scene. Otherwise, wouldn't it get old? Wouldn't you start to, almost want something bad to happen? Something disappointing? Wouldn't you crave the mundane? Sleep? A rainy day? Maybe there isn't any alcohol in heaven, she said, smiling mischievously. No coffee, no fattening foods, no cheese, no bread and butter, no fried chicken, no steak, no French fries. Maybe, he allowed, maybe. This is heaven, he thought, right here. The cold of the night made her hand feel warmer, encouraged him to squeeze tighter. He wasn't drunk, not even close, but the alcohol did take any edge away. The drizzle that fell to his face cooled his skin. Yes, this was heaven. There was rain in his eyelids, rain tracing a path down his jawline, rain dripping off the tip of his nose. She smiled, squeezed his hand. They began slowly making their way back in the direction of the bar. It wasn't dew, of course, but there were tiny droplets, tiny diamond beads of rain in her red hair, and her cheeks were flushed red with wine and the cold. When they reached the Tomahawk room, right where they started, he asked, "Where are you parked?" They stood there in the wash of pink neon light, faint music issuing out, crimson and clover. He could hear it, the reverb of the guitar, the plaintiveness of the vocals. It wasn't the song he would have selected if he could have soundtracked this moment, but there was something about the sound, the blurriness of the guitar that fit like a missing puzzle piece. And he just wrapped her in his arms and breathed in her hair. He wanted so very badly to invite her back to his house, but knew that all this should take longer, that he wanted both not to waste a second and to extend each possible moment as long as humanly possible. He kissed her again, and she kissed him back. "Can I call you?" he asked. "You better call me," she said, smiling. "Get a girl's hopes up." He felt like his heart was a dam about to be detonated with happiness and promise, about to burst. He hadn't messed up, had in no way done anything to diminish the evening. He had said the things he felt. He had not drunk too much. He had been brave. He had been his best self, his best person, the man he should have always been. He wanted to be that way for her, for the remainder of his days. "Good night," she said at last. She even blew him a little kiss. He watched her open the driver's side door of an old baby blue Saturn all pocked with rust. One headlight was out, and he hoped she wouldn't be pulled over. He would replace that headlight the next time he saw her. In fact, he'd buy the light bulb tomorrow morning before he could forget. The engine started, and she checked her rearview mirror before giving him a wave and departing. The instant she was gone, he wanted her back. He hadn't felt so alive in years, knew that he would not be able to fall asleep that night. He drove home slowly, very, very slowly. About 70 miles separated Chippewa Falls and Spooner, but the driving was easy, and there was something calming, something therapeutic about taking the highway with no rush, headlights swimming past him, passing signs, the steady, soft hum of the engine, the warm air issuing from the vents. He was reliving the night, like rewatching a favorite movie or dropping the needle again and again and again at the start of a sacred song. Now the lightest of snows was falling through the throw of the headlights, and he felt it was a blessing, a sure sign of good things to come, the first snow of the year. His father used to wake him up on such nights. He'd feel the old man's warm hand on his little boy chest, the kind, easy command, "Wake up, it's snowing." And he would stand on the front stoop with his little brother in their pajamas, bare little boy feet on the cold, damp concrete stoop, their hands out like paupers, like street urchins begging alms, their mouths open to taste the snow. First snows were a magical thing, a new season, life on earth resting, pulling a blanket over its shoulder before a long, dark sleep. He turned into his driveway, parked the truck, and unlocked his back door. Blueberry, his dog, stood there, tail wagging, mouth open in welcome. He made for the living room, built a small fire in the wood stove, and sat down heavily in his favorite chair, his hand resting on the gentle rise of his dog's head. He did not want to close his eyes, but he did. Minutes later, his chin slowly sagged to his chest, and the dog turned a few lazy circles before slumping onto his shoes, there to fall asleep at his master's feet as the fire died down to orange-black embers, then white ashes. Thanks. So I think most writers, I'd like to think most writers anyway, if they had been in my spot at the Tomahawk Room, that's a good place to start a novel. But it's not really enough for a whole novel, right? It's a good opening scene. It's interesting. But the real work was thinking about who those people were at the bar. When had they been in love? Were they high school sweethearts? Were they college sweethearts? Had they been married in their early 20s? What broke them apart? Did they have children? Do they have grandchildren now? Is there enough space in their lives as 60-somethings to come back together? All that was really fun for me to imagine. And I think it built really rich characters because I had to start basically in their late teens to construct these characters to figure out who they were in their mid-60s, which was really rewarding. But I'll tell you one sort of fun thing about that scene. When I wrote The Hearts of Men, it was first published in France, even before it was published here in the US. And my French editor brought me to Paris to promote the book, and it was a spring morning. It was very rainy in Paris, and my publisher had rented out this old embassy, and it was just filled with publishing people, like wall-to-wall French publishing people. And so my editor is a year older than me, which I like to remind her of. And we have kids about the same age, and she has been with me from the start. Publishing is not as loyal an industry as you might think it is. If you're not making a publishing company money, they don't really care, right? And she's been one of the few people that's been extraordinarily loyal to me throughout, whether I was making money or not. So here I am following her through this embassy. It's raining outside, it's green in Paris. And a waiter comes up to us when we had first entered the building with a tray of champagne. And my editor, of course, being French, instantly grabbed the champagne flute. And I was like, oh, I've got a flight to catch in 3 hours or 3.5 hours. I probably shouldn't start drinking. And she just looked at me like, are you crazy? So then I started to relax. And I thought, I don't know when I'll be in Paris again. So anytime the waiter came around with the champagne, I started drinking, and I realized I couldn't speak to anyone because I don't know how to speak French. So I just kind of enjoyed following along behind my editor, and then at some point I introduced the book, and then I had a wonderful lunch with her, and she sent me on my way back home. All which is to say that I don't really have a hard time living in the moment. I'm really here right now with you, and I don't take this for granted. There's so many wonderful books that get put out every year, and not every author is so lucky to have a crowd like this. Not every author is so lucky to be published in France or to have a wonderful editor like that. And that's kind of what my sense of heaven is. It's just pay attention when you're in one of those moments.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our club book audience for questions and comments for Nickolas Butler and his work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering if Butler knows anything about the couple the book is inspired by.
Well, here's what I know. I know that I am friends with the owner of the Tomahawk Bar. I know all the bartenders. I know the night that I was there at the bar. I know the time. I know who the bartender was. I know that the book has received plenty of regional press coverage, and none of us can figure out who that couple was. So that, for me, psychologically, that's had the effect of at first I started to think like, well, did I even witness something? Like was this like Woody Allen's movie Midnight in Paris, where like I saw some scene that nobody else saw, you know? But I don't think that's true. I think what I maybe saw was two people beginning an affair. Sure. And so I extrapolated this whole backstory, this whole romantic forward movement of their relationship. But I think if it was that romantic and pure, we might have found them. But it was a little bit like, I don't know how many of you are on social media, but you know, there was that moment where the couple was caught at the Coldplay concert, which I don't know how you responded to that. Part of me felt like, well, you're having an affair, you're responsible for the affair. The other part of me thought like, oh my God. Can you imagine being in their spot and like, did I do that to these? I mean, this is really, like, I didn't expose anyone. I don't know what their names are or what they look like, but I kind of wonder if that's not what was going on. Trust me, the bar has tried to figure it out. Because what's been really sweet is like the Tomahawk Room, this is a shameless plug for the Tomahawk Room, though I'm not on their payroll or anything like that. But if you go to downtown Chippewa Falls, kind of their main street is Bridge Street, and it goes up from the river almost all the way to the historic Leinenkugel's brewery, which is now unfortunately closed. I love Chippewa Falls. It was kind of the outer edge of my universe as a kid growing up. Like if we were in Chippewa Falls, like what were we doing? Like that was the edge of my universe. These days, I just think the Tomahawk Room is a really special place. Outwardly, I don't think it looks like anything special, but it's in a historic, what used to be a hotel. Now it's housing for people with some forms of disability, okay? And one of the sweetest things about the bar is many of the people that live above it might want to make a frozen pizza for themselves, okay? But they might not remember that they put it in the oven. So they'll come down to the bar and they'll order a frozen pizza, or they want to just feel like a normal person, so they order a Coca-Cola or a Sprite or whatever it is, and no one at that bar would ever make them feel any sort of way for where they live or whatever their disabilities are. And it's got this really like sweet, kind, I want to say progressive sort of attitude, but it's even more holistic than that. They're just, everybody who works at the bar is kind and just cares about people in the community. And so they've been really kind to me and my books throughout, and it was a fun place to situate this book. You know, I realize in hindsight that not everybody as an adult goes to a bar with the frequency that I might go to a bar. I realize that now. But you know, one of the things about Wisconsin is just like, when I was thinking about those people there meeting at that bar, like they could have met anywhere. They could have met at a Starbucks at 8 o'clock in the morning, or they could have gone for a walk at a public park, but they chose to go to this bar. And to me, that was illuminating as to who they might be, and that plays a part in the book moving forward, of course.
This audience member asks about the most challenging part of writing a love story.
Well, I think the way that I want to answer that question is by saying that the minute that I determined that I was going to follow that story, I thought about other literary love stories that I hold in high regard. The first one that came to mind was Our Souls at Night by Kent Haruf. How many people have read that? Oh, wonderful. sometimes I feel this desolation when I talk to a group of people and they haven't read that book. I just want to be like, if I was a rich man, I would buy you all a copy right now, you know. If you haven't read it, don't feel bad, don't despair. You have a wonderful thing awaiting you. It's a genius book, and it's so kind, and it was sort of a marker for me when I was thinking about this book, you know. I think one thing that I love about his writing is that it's very austere and beautiful on the page. And I incorporated that in this. I didn't use any quotation marks in this book because one thing that I was wary of is I thought, I don't want the publisher to market this as just like a standard romance, okay? There's other things at play in this book that I think make it more complicated than that. There's nothing wrong with reading romances whatsoever. My wife consumes tons of romances every year. But this book has some other considerations that it takes into account that I think set it aside from a normal romance. Interestingly, at about the time I was at that bar and heard that information, for some reason, I was checking into a lot of Midwestern bed and breakfasts, like the kind that hadn't been updated since the 90s. And so I'd be laying in like a frilly bed, you know, with like weird paisley on the wall, paisley wallpaper or something like that. And on almost every bookshelf was The Bridges of Madison County. And so I'm not picking on The Bridges of Madison County at all. I read it to see why it has endured so long, which seems like a constructive thing to do. It's not a perfect book. It hasn't aged 100% well. But one thing that I think it does do really well is it celebrates a corner of the Midwest that the rest of the universe doesn't pay any attention to, which is very much like Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, you know? So, you know, I thought about that. I thought about snow falling on cedars, and I just thought about these books that were romantic, that told a good love story, but told it in a way that was attractive to me. And that's kind of how I started to think about telling the love story. And I don't know that I'll ever write another book quite like this, but that's also been part of my career, is like, I just try to write a different book every single time. I'm not really interested in, I don't want to do the same thing every time, you know, so.
This question is if Butler maps out his story or lets his characters guide the narrative.
Not because I think that doesn't work or can't work, but what I worry about is that some people become so invested in their roadmap of a novel that they forget about writing the novel. Like, you can only really sell the draft of the novel, you can't sell your plan for it, okay? So oftentimes I know that opening scene and I know the ending scene, and that's what happened in this book. I knew that it was gonna happen at the Tomahawk Room in the beginning, and then I had the sense that they were gonna end up in Chicago at the end. I didn't really know what was gonna happen in between them, and that's the fun part for me, right? Sometimes writing a book is not fun. Like in the case of Godspeed, I kind of put myself on the same schedule as the characters in that book, which is kind of a sweaty, desperate, meth-fueled schedule. I was not using crystal meth, I'm happy to report, but that was not super fun to write. This book was more pleasant to write. And that was part of my project too. I feel like there's plenty of things in our culture right now that are super dark, and depressing, and I just thought, I'm just gonna write a book that's kind and allows people that our culture doesn't normally pay attention to have a second chance at love and happiness. And one thing that I didn't really account for is that I think, you know, it is a book about love and romance, but it's also a book about kind of forming your family later in life, which I didn't plan, and I'm really proud of now.
Our next question is if Nickolas Butler thinks this novel would work if the characters were younger.
I don't know. I think you're the first person who's ever asked me that. My gut reaction to your question is to say it's a great question and it wouldn't have worked as well. But I think part of the thing that I responded to as a stranger sitting at that bar was that this guy put all his cards on the table right away. And what I took out of that was that he was filled with an old regret. And he was surveying the landscape of his life, and he'd probably lived 60, 65, 70 years, and he's looking ahead into the future, and he doesn't know how much time he's got left. I think one of the reasons why I felt confident about writing this book is that my dad had a massive brain aneurysm when he was 49. And I became his guardian, his legal guardian at 49 when I was 19. And then for the next 23 years of his life, he lived in nursing homes. And I was in charge of his finances and all his medical decisions over that 23 years of his life. Tomorrow I turn 46. So do you think that I take it for granted that I'm going to live to 50 or 55 or 60 or 65? Not at all. And I think that's what I heard from that man in that moment. And that's what was so, he was kind of desperate. And I don't think of desperation as being a sexy quality, right? on a first date. I think that woman would have been well within her rights to be like, pump the brakes, guy, let's go on a second date. But I think that was what was so remarkable, is that some people could be married for 50 years and never hear that level of romance in a 10-minute period of time. And that's the truth. And he was just willing to put it out there. And that was compelling to me. So I just did a book festival in Washington Island off the coast of Door County, in Wisconsin. And I presented the book much as I presented it to you just now. And then I had a signing line where I was signing books, and a woman waited till the very end, where she was like the last person to come up to get her book signed, and she said, I have something to confide in you. My husband was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I love him, and he's a good man, and we've been going through this for a little while. And just at the time he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my high school sweetheart reached back out to me with a really, really romantic kind of proposal. And you could see how complicated that decision was. And I'm not standing in judgment of how she feels or whatever she does, but she wanted to let me know that this is real, it's happening, like it happens to people. And yeah.
This Club Book audience member wonders how Nickolas Butler became a writer.
Well, my background's kind of checkered, I guess you could say. I grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in a middle class, at times upper middle class family. In my 20s, I graduated from UW-Madison in 2002, which was one of the worst job markets, right? Up until maybe now. So I graduated from UW-Madison with honors in English, but like a lot of people in Madison who were driving cabs with PhDs in physics or something like that, I couldn't find a good job, or what other people would consider to be a good job. So I worked a lot of tough jobs, like I was a meat packer, I was a coffee roaster, I was an office manager, I worked at a liquor store. I just did whatever I could. I didn't make any money throughout my 20s. At 29, I got accepted to the Iowa Writers Workshop and worked my tail off there because I understood what an opportunity it was. So like my younger colleagues were getting drunk and high all the time. And I got drunk a little bit, but mostly I just worked on my craft really hard, really intensively. And at 32, I sold Shotgun Lovesongs, which just changed the landscape of my life. I tell people it was like waking up into a dream. Like I'd always wanted to be a writer, and now I could be a full-time writer. But what got me into it is my fifth grade, well, a couple things. My mom filled our house with books, and so I always had books to read. And when I got bored with one level of reading, she would go talk to our librarians and find the next toughest thing and give that to me. And in my mind, it's a little bit like the guy in a locomotive who's shoveling coal into the, locomotive. That was my mom shoveling books into my head. But in the fifth grade, I had a teacher named Doug Smith, And Doug is, other than, my mom, kind of my hero. He's no longer with us, but he was a former Major League Baseball player, and he was kind of like Archibald Moonlight Graham in Field of Dreams, if you remember that Burt Lancaster character. Doug Smith had played professional baseball. He was so good that he probably would have made the major leagues, except one day he was playing baseball at Carson Park in Eau Claire, where I'm from, and a young woman was sitting in the second row and making eyes at him, and she sent him a message, and he sent her a message back, and they fell in love. And she was from Eau Claire, and so rather than matriculating up the ladder of single A, double A, triple A, major league, he just said, "I'll just stop here." Wow. Super romantic. Super romantic, and by the way, when we don't think you're asking a question about romance and characters in their 60s or 70s, like, that's pretty hot too, right? Anyway, Doug assigned us a year-long project about the westward migration across America in the 1860s. So for 1 hour every week, I think it was, or maybe every day, we could research that westward migration across America. We could draw maps, we could draw pictures, or we could write a narrative. And it lasted all year long, and mine ultimately was like 135 pages long. And what I got from that was that he believed in me as a writer. He gave me the space to become a writer. He gave me the confidence. And from that project, many other public school teachers through the years recognized that I was a writer. And even though I graduated in the 49th percentile of my high school graduating class, those teachers continued to give me side projects that kept me going, like the middle school newspaper or the high school newspaper, whatever it was. And so one thing that I tell groups of people is like, this is what public school teachers can do if they don't have to teach to a test. If you just trust teachers to know what's right for their students and to teach right to those students, and you give people that creativity, you get a freak like me.
But your mother was a big inspiration.
Huge inspiration, yes. To this day, yeah. She's heard this talk enough that she could give my talk. Yeah. But I give a ton of credit to her, absolutely.
Our next question is how Butler knows what will work as a story and what will not.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. The way that I have to frame my answer is that a year ago, I decided, perhaps foolishly, to run for Wisconsin State Assembly, okay? So I didn't win. I had to win a primary race, and I lost it. But I learned a lot about humanity during that political race. And I would knock on people's doors, of course, introduce myself, give them my propaganda, whatever it was. I feel really fortunate to have received people's stories. And what I realized is that whether you're sitting at a bar listening to two people try to reconnect, or you're in a nursing home and you're talking to somebody who might feel lonely, or you're listening to somebody who's on the cusp of retirement talk about how they made their living and what they're looking forward to doing, in the future. When people hear that I'm a writer, they understand that I like a story, and then they start to tell me the story that most defines them. And you all experience this as well, though you might not register it as acutely as I do, but you can choose when somebody tells you a story to ignore them or to wait for your time to talk, or to sit back and be quiet and try to understand why it is that they're telling you a story. And when you really start to do that, it enriches the landscape of your life so much. And that moment at the bar, I thought, this is it. Like, my antenna was way up and very excited. Because I just thought, like writers talk about what's at stake in a story, and everything was at stake here. Like this man's regret, love, mistakes, romance, his future, his past. It was all there, like right in that moment. But a friend of mine just went out, it seems to happen at bars, I apologize, but a friend of mine who helped me on my political campaign is a union organizer, okay? So he's always looking for different places to unionize. One day, he's going through the records of dam operators in Wisconsin, okay? And he finds this small dam in a place that he happens to like to go for duck hunting. He finds it to be a beautiful part of the state. And he realizes that there's only 3 guys who operate the small town dam. So he goes there and he has a meeting with them and he's trying to get them to unionize, right? They don't really want to because they've been farmers before, but now they're getting paid $75,000 a year individually, no benefits, no retirement, but they're getting paid $75,000 a year to basically do nothing because the dam is owned by 2 guys in Manhattan that operate the dam to mine crypto. So then he takes my friend into a back room where there's all these supercomputers. 75, it's hard for me not to use the full range of language. 75 supercomputers in a room in nowhere, Wisconsin, next to a dam. That's monitoring the market, so people in Manhattan are making shitloads of money. And they don't want to unionize. And he's telling me the story, and I'm like, that's everything about America right now. These 3 guys are protecting these dudes in New York City who are multimillionaires. They have no benefits. They don't want to join the union. This community could own a dam that would electrify their whole community, but it's being owned by these 3 tech bros. The possibility of me writing a novel about that story, 100%. You see, but I wouldn't have to pay attention. I could say, oh, that's a great story. But like the minute he started telling me that, I was like, why are you telling me this story? And sometimes a person who's telling you the story, they don't even know why they're telling you the story. They just know it's important or it excites them. And then it's my job to say, okay, why? Why? And then just keep asking why.
This fan inquires about the reasons for the success of Butler's book, The Hearts of Men, in France.
The honest answer is I don't really know. I think there's some things that are fortuitous, lucky. I have a great editor who pushed the book really hard, and that makes all the difference. Like, there's so many wonderful books, tens of thousands of wonderful books every year that go out into the world, but they just don't have a champion and they slip through the cracks. I was lucky to have a great editor who pushed that book. On a larger level, my books don't do well guaranteed in every culture. Like the Brits, for example, don't seem to care for my books. But I think that kind of makes sense because they look for more of a sort of subtle, stiff upper lip, sophistication in their literature. And mine is like very heartfelt, and it tends to be about romantic ideals like love, friendship, marriage, sex, nature, food, things like that. And so like my books do well in France, in Spain, in Italy, those sort of what I would presume to call like kind of romantic cultures. But they don't do well in, like my books don't do well in Germany. They don't do well in Israel or Scandinavia. So I don't know, you know? And you know, one of the things that I can say in this moment without being too partisan, I think, because I don't want to get the library in trouble, is that like, I don't know what the future of my international publishing is going to look like because we've sort of pissed off all of our allies. And if I was a French person right now, I might not be reaching for an American writer off the book table, or even my editor, right? So I like today, there was the introduction of 100% tariff on foreign films, which maybe to everybody in this room that doesn't really mean anything. Unfortunately, right now I have 2 projects that were in negotiations to be developed, and the financiers for those movies are foreign financiers. So how do these policies affect Americans? Well, I'm probably going to lose tens of thousands of dollars in this last quarter of the year.
Another audience member wonders how Nickolas Butler shapes his complex characters.
One of my best friends is a guy named Nick Gulig, who's the former poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin, and he and I were in conversation about this book. And Nick is a very serious poet, okay? By which I mean, there's poets that have senses of humor, like Billy Collins, and Nick does not really have a sense of humor about his poetry, okay? So, and we've been friends since we were 12 years old, so we have this sort of boyhood friendship where he says shit like, I haven't read that book yet of yours, I'm just waiting for the movie to get made. Okay. You know when you're friends with somebody for a long time. So he and I were going to sit down and have this conversation at a public library about my book, and I thought, oh my God, like, is this going to be super uncomfortable? Is he going to put me through the ringer? But he said something that was kind of infinitely sweeter than any other interviewer I've ever had. He said, I knew your dad, and your dad was a bad alcoholic. And it seems to me like some of what you're doing in this book is giving your dad an alternative life path to fix some of the mistakes that he made in his life. And, you know, I was just like, God damn it. How did you do that? And I never really thought about that when I was writing the book, but the truth of the matter is my dad was a really bad alcoholic, and his alcoholism destroyed our family. It destroyed his marriage with my mom. It led to that aneurysm. It led to me taking care of him for 23 years. And maybe that's what I was doing in the back of my mind, was this character who's a little bit like my dad, you know, or maybe it was me sitting in the bar, seeing that man who was about my dad's age, you know, and just having this kind of like empathy for a guy like that, you know. But I appreciate your comment very much, because I didn't really write the book to write like a great romance. I just wrote the book to write a great book. About people, about normal people. I will say something funny to sort of leaven that heaviness that I just introduced, but a number of years ago, my brother-in-law got married. I guess it's about 15 years ago, something like that. Beautiful fall night, kind of like tonight. We're out at an apple orchard, and my wife comes from a big farm family. All her people are from south of Eau Claire in the Oliva, Osseo metropolitan area. So, you know, everybody's drinking and having a good time. And at one point in the evening, just at dusk, I remember this like it was like a movie. I'm sitting on a hay bale, drinking some beer, and across from me, like from me to you, is my wife's grandmother, Joyce, who would have been about 85 at the time. And Joyce had 7 or 8 kids, I can't remember. And she's just looking at me. And finally I was like, Joyce, what are you thinking about? And she's like, you know what I like about your books? And I was like, please tell me, because I didn't know you'd read my books. She's like, you know what I like about your books? They have the perfect amount of sex scenes. And I was like, what's the perfect amount of sex scenes? And she's like, 3. 2 is boring. Less than 2, not at all. More than 3, tawdry. I can't remember how many sex scenes are in this book, but anytime I write a book, I have Joyce in the back of my head, like three sex scenes.
This question asker is curious about how Butler builds fictional characters into the real world around him.
The gift of the story is being in the bar to hear that. Yep. The curse of that moment was also that I got 10 minutes or 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. So there's things that you can extrapolate from that time, things you can't extrapolate from that time. I felt like he had done something to split them up. To me, it was relevant that they were meeting in a bar. I thought, well, Wisconsin is a state that deals with a great deal amount of alcoholism. We joke about drinking Wisconsinably. Ha ha. So it seemed possible that that was what had broke them up. He also didn't seem like somebody from the Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire area, because what I didn't tell you about their conversation is a little bit later, he invites her to a wedding. He talks about coming to Minneapolis to buy clothes, and I was like, I've never heard from somebody from Chippewa talk about buying clothes here, okay? So it just seemed like a little off. He seemed to have more money than her, but she seemed to be from Chippewa Falls. So I thought, why would he leave and she stay here? And what seems psychologically realistic to me is that men leave women with children. We leave women to raise children. And so I saw her raising this family and then potentially having grandchildren and all of that keeping her in this place. And she didn't seem like she came from much money, that woman at the bar. So I just saw this woman who cared deeply about family, was committed to her children and her grandchildren. And, you know, on the negative side, I think that she also has a little bit of a martyr complex. Like she's willing to just kind of say, I have to take care of these people, I have to take care of these people, rather than indulge her own happiness, which is kind of a character flaw in a way, and surfaces in the book, right? And I saw him as being this guy who he just did whatever was fun or exciting in the moment. And he had no one to spend money on, so then he could accumulate wealth, but he gets to the end of his life, and like a lot of people who get to the end of their life with a ton of money, but maybe have not been good fathers or mothers, well, what do you do then? You reconcile with the people that you've left behind. So that became kind of the mechanics for things, you know. And I should also say, you know, at 20, that experience at the bar happened in 2022. That's kind of coming off the heels of COVID. And during COVID, I was drinking too much. My wife maintained her job, but she would basically she had to go back into the office after a month or something like that. She got, so she's doing her thing. Meanwhile, I'm at home with two kids trying to be their teacher, and they didn't want me as their teacher, even though I have experience in teaching, and I would create classes like ornithology, where we're going out on the 16 acres of land that we live on at 6 o'clock in the morning to identify birds. Well, they thought that was bullshit, Or we'd have a music appreciation class where I'd drop the needle on Miles Davis's Kind of Blue and say, what's happening here? What do you think of this music? Or, whatever it was, Neil Young or Bruce Springsteen. Again, Dad, why do we have to listen to this music? So, when 4 o'clock came around, I was ready for a drink. And at the beginning of COVID, maybe my wife and I would split a bottle of wine. Well, it wasn't but 2 weeks into that when we were splitting more than a bottle of wine. And then I was going to the liquor store for half a case of wine. And then I was going to the liquor store for a case of wine. And then I'm going to the liquor store for 2 cases of wine. And I had to start having a conversation with myself about what are you doing? And don't lose track of yourself. Your dad was an alcoholic. Is that what you want? So, and that seems psychologically realistic to me too, that this Melissa character, she's had enough disappointments in her life and things haven't worked out easily for her. And then I like the fact that she and Charlie are dealing with the same thing. They want to be better. They both recognize in one another that they're both alcoholics. They recognize the fun in drinking alcohol. If you read this book, there's passages where I talk about drinking beer or drinking vodka or wine. And that's really how I feel about it. On a hot day when I drink a cold glass of beer, or this time of year, my friend Annie and I went and had a vodka gimlet. I just love a vodka gimlet right now. But I'm aware that that's dangerous too. So
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering what Nickolas Butler is working on next.
well, actually, I told you prior that I don't like to write the same story twice, but I'm working on a sequel to Shotgun Lovesongs. So yeah, so the characters would be like 10, 15 years older, hopefully wiser, but yeah, we'll see. It's not going as like smoothly as I would like, but I think I just want it to be perfect, so I'm really hard on myself. Thank you so much for coming out.
That wraps up our Hennepin County Library event with Nickolas Butler. Make sure to catch our next podcast with Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. New York Times bestselling author Sylvia Moreno-Garcia masterfully blends elements of horror, fantasy, noir, and historical fiction. Her novels include the award-winning Mexican Gothic, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, and The Seventh Veil of Salome. Her latest, The Bewitching, hit shelves in July. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including Melsa, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.